And welcome everyone. We should be live. We are live from Gravesend in Kent. I'm just gonna give it a minute until I can see that you guys are indeed in the chat. Let me know if you can hear me properly in the chat. You're in the line in Starbucks. Good. I hope you make it home soon. Hello again, Laurie. Nice to see you, Linda. Nice to see you, Tish. Perfect. Thank you, Tish. So we've got about 7 minutes before to start. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. I'm gonna test the microphone. I'm sure most of you know the drill. I'm just gonna tap it 3 times and let me know in the chat if you don't hear the tapping. There we go. You should have been able to hear that. If not, my connection could be loose. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you here. So we've got about 5 minutes precisely, 5 minutes before we start. So if any of you were watching this on replay in the next few weeks or months, if you wanted to skip the hellos, if you wanted to go straight into the walking tour, you can skip the next 5 minutes. And welcome, Todd. Nice to see you, Ronnie. So we've got about 5 minutes to get to know each other before it's officially time to start. Let me give you a glimpse of the view. There's not much to see, but let me show you where I am. We are in a lovely little green just by the river here in Gravesend. Warmer weather for you, yeah. Yeah, I'm actually wearing my jacket and stuff. I don't need to, it's not that cold. But I thought, the sun is gonna go down in a moment. It was quite warm earlier today. I was in a t-shirt. Well, mainly because I was cycling. It took me ages to get here because there's no trains, so I had to take bus from placements. So I cycled to Greenwich, took a train for a few stops until the line was stopped. I guess they're working on the line or something. So I had to take a bus from placement. I think it took me 2.5 hours to get here. And it's gonna be the same on the way home. Well, it's not that far. It's probably like, 30 miles? Maybe not even. Maybe 20 miles. And welcome, Martin. Nice to see you here. Welcome anyone that just joined. We've got a few minutes before to go. While we're waiting, let me know in the chat, give me a thumbs up or something in the chat if you have seen the Disney Pocahontas. Just so I get an idea if I'm gonna be destroying the cartoon for you. Let me know if you've seen it, so give me a thumbs up or whatever if you've seen it. Or just a yes or no. That also works. So Pocahontas 1, because there were actually 2 Disneys. You exhausted for me? Well, it's not too tiring. It's just sitting on trains and buses, but it took a while. You never saw it, Tish. Unacceptable. How many miles do I bike on average a day? Well, today that would be about 2 hours. I cycled to Buckingham Palace and back, and then from home to Greenwich and back. I could have taken the train closer to mine, but it's actually a bit cheaper to go all the way down to Greenwich because it's on 3, I guess. And welcome, Fernand. Oh, you've seen it. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I am a child of the 90s. I wasn't born in the 90s, I'm born in 87. But when Pocahontas 1 came out, I was probably the perfect Disney age. Welcome, Emma. So yeah, I remember having the VHS of the Disney Pocahontas, the first one. I also had a soft toy of a raccoon, a little Miko. So for the ones that don't know, it's Pocahontas' pet raccoon in the Disney. But my little sister stole it from me. Pocahontas 2 is actually a little bit more accurate. What did you see? A capybara? Let me show you the view again if you're getting tired of my face. So yeah, Pocahontas 1 I saw as a child. The 2 I think I saw it later on. But yeah, my sister was carrying my little soft toy raccoon for ages. Do you know, or do you care to guess, how we call a raccoon in French? I mean, what would it translate into? It's actually a rather funny name. You did see a caipi at the zoo, okay. So how do you think we call a raccoon in French? It's a very random name. Hi Colleen, welcome. Let's see what time it is. It might be nearly time to start. Oh, it is 5, so it is time to go. Let me gracefully stand up and I'll tell you then how we call a raccoon. It's called a washing rat kitten. Or I don't know if you can call a rat a kitten, but a washing baby rat, a raton laveur. I don't know why, it's very random. I think it's because the raccoons, they tend to wash their food. You know, if you give them a grape, for example, they actually dip it into water before to eat it. But yeah. Anyway, let me flip this camera around and let's go. If anyone was completely new to me, I'm Natalie, and today we are going for a little live walk in Gravesend, where I'll tell you the true story of Pocahontas, and I'll show you her resting place. Let's go. So Gravesend is a lovely little town on the... Oh wow, that's a huge... is that a cruise? I don't know what that ship is, but it's big. It doesn't look like a cruise ship. It's quite ugly for a cruise ship. Anyway, we are at the estuary, really. So Gravesend is usually the first or the last. You know, if you're coming into London, it's the first British town you might see. And if you live in London, as many, for example, people did in the 19th century to go and export themselves to Australia or anything, that would be the last town you see. So we are right by the estuary. And before we go much further, I've got a little surprise. There's a very interesting statue over here. I've just discovered it. I didn't know she was here. There she is. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She's been here, she's in 2018 actually. She was commissioned after her 90th birthday. But yeah, beautiful statue. She's dressed up in the Order of the Garter robes. So that's the uniform or the robes you'll see in April. You know, when they do the Garter ceremony in Windsor. I read an article that said it was the only statue of the Queen sitting down. Surely that cannot be true, because I know, and we know, I've shown you before, there's a statue of the Queen sitting down in Windsor. She's in a very casual outfit, sitting down with the corgis. I think it's called the Lady of Windsor. So it might be the only statue of her sitting down on a throne, but it's not the only statue of her sitting down. So the sculptor is Douglas Jennings. So yeah, quite a nice little surprise. I didn't know she was here. You know what? I actually was looking into, there's another statue down there, excuse my finger, but just down there is a pilot from the RAF from the Second World War. And he's from India, he's from the Sikh community. And I thought, oh, I should look a bit into him, because you know, it's just nice to have a statue of someone that is someone that's not white. And I was looking into his statue, and suddenly a picture of the Queen statue came up, and I was like, hold on, what is the Queen doing here? And I realized that the Queen statue was just meters away, and I never noticed her. Anyway, this is the River Thames, of course. So we're very, very close to the estuary. On the other side of the river, it doesn't look very pretty, because this is Tilbury. This is the port of London, basically. You might know in the 60s, when they invented the shipping containers, those boats were way too big to come all the way down to London, so they moved the port to Tilbury. So that's and a lot of jobs went along with the port, because nowadays, you know, you have computers and machineries moving the containers, so you really don't need many dockers anymore. Anyway, here he is, Squadron Leader Mahinder Said Puji. So he was from India originally, and he was a pilot in the RAF. He died here in Gravesend not that long ago, 2010, and apparently he had been complaining that, you know, he didn't feel very much represented. You know, that people tend to forget that, you know, Indians, of course, very much took part in the war, and that's why they decided to have a statue of him after he died. That's a little pier there. It's from the 1830s, would you believe? I think it's one of the oldest cast iron piers ever. You saw a rat the size of a dog years ago. I actually kind of like rats. They look like squirrels I don't like their tails, but I probably wouldn't go and cuddle them, because we have a bad image of them, you know, because of the plague and stuff. So that's probably why we don't like them, but I think they're kind of cute. Anyway, this is a lovely pub as well. It's actually one of the oldest pubs in Kent. It's over 500 years old. And if you happen to be from Canada or New Zealand or Australia or even from the US to an extent, it might be a place that your ancestors would have visited, because this was the last port. So if you boarded a ship to go down to any of the colonies, you probably would have spent a couple of nights in those inns, waiting for your ship to go down to, I don't know, Newcastle, Australia, or whatever it might be. Now, time to tell you about Pocahontas. So the reason why I choose Gravesend to do this tour, it's because it is the place where she's buried. So we'll go and see the little burial ground. But to tell you how Princess Pocahontas ended up here, we need to go back to the beginning, the very beginning of the 17th century. Now, when we talk about Britain, we kind of, on colonialism, we tend to think, because of the British Empire and what it later on became, we tend to think that Britain was a great colonizer. Yes, but they were a bit late in the colonization game. At the time of Pocahontas in 1609, Britain really had not done much compared to the French had already taken a large chunk of Canada. The Spanish had already claimed some land in Florida and of course Latin America. So, because Queen Elizabeth II had been a a bit late in the colonization game. All the Spanish would go and get some gold in Latin America, and the English, they were basically just doing piracy. They were stealing the gold from the Spanish, but they didn't really go and try to claim some land or and set up any settlement. She had tried, Queen Elizabeth I, she had tried to send Walter Raleigh to do a settlement in Virginia. Virginia was named after the Virgin Queen, of course, Queen Elizabeth I. Walter Raleigh went with, I think he had 90 men, so they dropped them there to start a settlement. And when they came back, the men had disappeared. To this day, we still don't know what happened to them. Did they die? Did they run away in I don't know, in the woods or whatever? All they found was a tree where they had engraved the name of a place. But that was it. We don't really know what happened to those men. I do apologize if I miss anything in the chat. It's particularly sunny at the moment, so it's actually a bit difficult for me to read the chat. So if there was any interesting questions, do make sure you repeat them once we are in the shade. Anyway, so yeah, the colonization business was not quite done yet compared to the Spanish or the French, and eventually, when James I came to the throne, he decided to start some settlements in the New World. He wanted to claim some land, of course, before the French and the Spanish took everything. So they decided to go down to Jamestown. Jamestown was named after James, King James. And what he did, really, he couldn't be bothered to really do it himself, so he gave a company a royal charter to start a settlement. So that's the Virginia Company. So basically, King James I somehow outsourced his colonialism. So the Virginia Company was a company. And that's important to remember, because as a company, they need a good reputation, like any trading company. So that could have influenced some of the choices or some of the things that happened later on. And so they sent 3 ships to go down to Jamestown to start a colony. One of the most famous passengers on the ship was a chap that you might have heard of, Captain John Smith. Of course, if you've watched the Pocahontas movie, you would have a picture of John Smith in head. He was an interesting chap. He was 27 at the time, but he had a very interesting life. Now I like the gates. You've got a little Native American in the cast. Let me show you the other one. It's probably better with the sun. In the railings themselves. So this is the St. George's Church where Pocahontas was buried. It's not the original church. I think the church has burned at some point, so they rebuilt it. So we cannot trace exactly where Pocahontas is buried, but it is somewhere in this burial ground. They actually had a team of researchers from Virginia that came on. They tried to locate her bones. They were not able to locate them. And you don't see many headstones anymore because they've been moved to the sides. We often do that with those old monuments because they do not want them to, if they were unstable, they don't want them to fall on a child or anything like that. So that's why they've been moved to the side. It's not that we don't respect the dead, it's that they're very, very old, Anyway, so Captain John Smith. Now, when I talk about Pocahontas, little disclaimer, Pocahontas, she doesn't really have a voice. The pen is always in the hands of the white man. So a lot of what we know about that story, we actually know it from Captain John Smith himself. Because he's published 16 years later, he's published his biography. I think it was called something along the line, The True Travels of Observation of Captain John Smith in Virginia. the very fact that he has to call it true does indicate that he might have spiced up his biography a little. And even before to go to Virginia, the man had a crazy life. He was in the army. He fancied himself a bit of a bad boy, like Walter Riley or Francis Drake. And he, everywhere he went, in his biography, everywhere he went, you had those local ladies falling madly in love with him. He had been saved a few times. He had gone to fight the Ottomans, so the Turks, and then he was captured as a slave. He managed to escape. He had actually managed to kill 3 Turks in a go with one blow of the axe. Then there was a lady that fell madly in love with him and asked her dad to forgive him and stuff. That's another little bench here for Queen Elizabeth II. So you can tell already from his biography that he potentially has the habit of romanticizing a little bit the events. Although a lot of it might be true. We've got some nice cherry blossom at this time of the year. And so that's why what we read from his account of Virginia might be partially true or might be completely true. We don't know. What we do know is that when he arrived at Jamestown, he was actually locked up. He had started a mutiny on board, so he was actually enchained. And he was imprisoned on the boat. He was meant to be hanged, but then his men realized that they very much needed him. So eventually, after a few weeks, he was released. Hi, Sandrine, and welcome everyone that just joined. Let me show you. There she is, Pocahontas. So eventually, Captain John Smith was released and he became the governor of the colony. When I said a colony, we're talking, I think it was 104 men, and by that point they were struggling. 60 had already died. 1595, by the way, that is debatable. It could be 96, 97, 98, we're not too sure. So yeah, he became the governor of a very much struggling colony. Jamestown, there was a reason why it was free. There was a reason why it was not occupied. It was actually terrible. It was bad for growing crops. The water was contaminated, and apparently they were drinking river water that was a bit salty, so they had too much salt in their system on top of that. And they were absolutely struggling for food. They couldn't go and hunt and fish as much as they wanted to, because the locals, they were actually targeted. They had built a little fort, so with their cannons and their guns, the Powhatan community, they actually called those guns, they called them the thunder sticks, because they wanted some of those thunder sticks. So, oh yes, a very, very short life, Tish. But you know what? She had a busy life. Out of 20 years she lived, she had time to be kidnapped, to be maybe violated, to have 2 kids, to be sent to England as a working advertising. So she had a very, very busy life. And again, we don't really know how she felt about any of it. Everything that was recorded from the English settlers. And on top of that, we didn't really trust Native Americans' oral history until I think it's 2007 that there was a book published about her from the Native Americans, from what they've heard from their grandparents and great-grandparents and all that. So some of the information I'm going to tell you today, some of it actually come from John Smith and some come from Pocahontas. So I'll make sure, from the native, not Pocahontas. We don't know anything we don't have any original sources from Pocahontas herself. So John Smith is there, the colony is struggling, and eventually he decided to go upriver, to go and look for food. And also he wanted to follow the river because at the time they were still looking for a way to go down towards the Indian Sea. I mean, it sounds ridiculous to us today, but you know, they didn't know how big was America, and they were desperately looking for a way to India. So he also tried to go upriver, see how far it goes, and he also wanted to meet Chief Powhatan. Powhatan, I call him Powhatan, but his actual name was Waun Sekao. He was the chief of what we could compare to a little kingdom, really. He was the chief of about 20,000 men. At the time, in the Powhatan native people, what happened is they had all those little villages, all those little tribes, but Chief Powhatan, although he would allow a little boss, a little governor in each tribe, he would be the big boss, and he'd take a wife in every single village. So a teenage girl that would be his wife for just a few months or a year or whatever, just time for them to have a child. So he would have a child in every single village in his little kingdom. It's not a kingdom, but we can kind of compare it to a little kingdom in Europe. 20,000 people, it's a lot of people. So those English settlers, you know, they didn't quite realize, but they actually arrived in one of the biggest and the most organized group of people in Northern America. And so Pocahontas was one of those many child. She probably had 20 or 30 half brothers and sisters. She was known to be Powhatan's favorite child. That's actually debatable. According to some, she was his favorite. Now, at that point, Smith doesn't know about Pocahontas yet. He's going upriver, and he actually got captured by some Native Americans. According to his memoirs, because that's all we can go with, because the two men that were with him, they were shot by the locals. So he was captured, and then he actually had a meeting with, that was Pocahontas' uncle at the time. And he was impressing them with his compass, you know, because they didn't have a compass over there. And he was taken prisoner. Eventually, one day, he managed to meet Waun Sekao, Pocahontas' dad, you know, the big chief. At the time, Chief Powhatan was in his 60s, and apparently, according to all accounts, he was a very impressive man. And that's quite interesting because, you know, the white men, when they talked about the locals, they were often a bit condescending, you know, they were a bit, patronizing and a bit... but with Chief Powhatan, even the white men writing about him, they had some form of respect for him. And so he actually had a meeting with the chief. And at that point, everything is going well. They had a feast with venison and all that. And according to John Smith, right after the feast, suddenly he was grabbed. His head was put on, he was literally put resting on two big rocks. And then the locals arrived with big clubs, and he was going to be clubbed to death. He believed at that point that he was going straight towards his execution. And at that very moment, half-naked Pocahontas jumped out of the crowd to basically cuddle him, to place herself between him and the clubs, to save his life. And seeing this big gesture from Pocahontas, Chief Powhatan apparently changed his mind and decided to spare John Smith. Now, this might or might not be true. Historians are still debating today whether this event ever happened or not. The reason that we tend to think it never happened, it's that, that was written down in, I think in 1624, so 16 years after the event. when Smith had already written about his travels and adventures in Virginia in 1608. Never did he mention Pocahontas saving his life. That's quite a cool little seat here on a trunk. And yes, Amanda, we'll talk about that in a moment. She had one proven child. We'll get to that, Amanda. And according to the local history, she had another one with Cocoon, but we'll get to that. Why on earth did he not mention that event in 1608? In his defense, his writing from that time were much shorter, so maybe he didn't have time to write about it. Or maybe it was a bit too sexy for the time, because at the time, the Virginia Company is still running on stuff. He maybe did not want to be accused of having any sexual relationships with the locals or whatever, who knows. The thing that you have to get out of your head if you've watched the cartoon, you probably imagine that Pocahontas and John Smith are two young adults, very much in love, flirting in the river. No, at that point, Pocahontas is, we believe, to be 10 years old. Between 9 and 12, we're not too sure, but even in his writings, Smith describes her as a child of 10. She would have been half naked, because at the time, the kids in the Powhatan community, they didn't need to wear much clothes. So it's not a romantic relationship, or if it was, but no. So did she really save him? Probably not. A very similar story had happened to Juan Ortiz, a Spanish conquistador in Florida, and he had already written about the event in English. So Smith might have read those accounts of what happened to the guy in Florida, and he might have just adapted it to his own story to spice up his autobiography. In his defense at the time, well, in 1624, pretty much everyone was dead anyway, so no one could really contradict those events. But he has been contradicted on many other stuff in his biography. No one had anything to say about Pocahontas. So it might have been true. Some historians believe that it might have been misinterpreted. Some historians believe that it might have been some kind of an adoption ritual, that to welcome him into the community, that they'll fake an execution, and that the daughter of the chief would welcome him in the family. It's actually possible, because we have some reasons to believe that Pocahontas actually considered herself as his mother when she's a child, he's an adult, but because much later on in England, she actually told him, now you're my father, like if she was his mother in the New World and he was her father in England. We'll get to that. So it could have been some kind of a ritual that was misinterpreted by Smith, or it could have been completely fake. It's probably completely fake. And after that, it's been all over paintings like this one from a French artist in Victorian times, or it's been taken on board by many writers, and of course by Disney. If you've seen the Disney, you might have seen that execution scene. So we don't know whether that happened or not, but we do know that he developed some kind of a relationship with the little Pocahontas. Pocahontas, at that point, she might already have spoken a little bit of English. Because the settlers, they actually, when they first got to Jamestown, they had an idea. They decided to do an exchange with the Powhatan. They sent a boy, an English boy. His name was Thomas Savage. You cannot make that up, Savage. In some of the sources, it's actually Salvage, but officially it's Savage. So he was sent to live with the Powhatan community for 3 years. So he could learn the language and help translating, and the other way around as well. There was a boy. They were meant to be the sons of the leaders. No, the English actually lied. He was not the son of anybody. He was a teenage boy that was a laborer. But It is possible, we don't know for sure, but it is possible that Pocahontas would have already learned a bit of English with Thomas Savage that lived in our village. We don't know. There's some nice street art around here. And anyway, after that, after the fake execution, Smith and Chief Powhatan, they made a deal so that Smith was going to be freed. The Powhatan community were going to help the settlers with a bit of food until they'd leave. Because Smith had lied. He said to them they were going to leave. They were just waiting for a ship and stuff. In exchange, Chief Powhatan wanted some thundersticks, some guns. And Smith had agreed. And then actually the English, they didn't quite respect the deal. They never really gave them any guns. But little Pocahontas was sent to give them some corn. So every so often she'd come to Jamestown with some corn to help the settlers. So that helped for a while, and they were not doing very well, but at least they had a bit of food thanks to the Powhatan. And eventually what happened is that the Virginia Company decided to change the governor. They decided to name a man, an English guy called Baron de la Warre. I think his name was Thomas West. Baron de la Warre, he was actually from the family of Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary Boleyn, he was one of the descendants. He didn't come to Jamestown quite yet. He was going to be sent by the Virginia Company. And when Smith heard that Baron de la Warre was going to come and take over, De la Warre, by the way, that led to Delaware. That's where the state get the name from. So Smith kind of left Jamestown because he didn't want to be part of it anymore. And then he had a gunpowder accident. He was on a canoe, and some gunpowder exploded on his canoe. He got a bit injured, and he left. So he left on the next ship. He went back back to England for a while, and then he went to explore. He went to map the area. He went a bit further north. He actually mapped the area where the Mayflower came many years later. And so Smith was gone, and apparently the Powhatans, they believed he was dead. Did people lie to them, or was it a misunderstanding? We don't quite know, but Pocahontas believed him to be dead. It doesn't matter. I mean, we don't even have any reasons to believe that Pocahontas actually liked him. If you looked at the Disney, we often think it's like an amazing love story. We don't even know if she actually liked him. And that's when the relationship between the English settlers and the Powhatan community kind of soured. Because the Powhatan realized that the English had lied. They were never going to go away, and Smith was gone. So Pocahontas and Smith, they were basically the liaison between the two. So after that, the English Powhatan war started. The English were absolutely starving. Because whenever they try to go out on hunting and stuff, they'll be shot by the Powhatans with their weapons and stuff. The Powhatan started to steal a few of the guns, and the English were like, "We're not going to do a deal until you give us back the guns." That was quite difficult for the English settlers. Very, very difficult indeed. They were really struggling for food. They started to eat the leather from their shoes. They started to eat anything, including the settlers that died. We know that for sure because they did some excavations in Jamestown, and they found in the same pit with horse bones and stuff, they found a skull She's been called Jane. They actually did a 3D representation of what Jane would have looked like. She was a teenager that died, probably starvation, 14 years old, I think she was. And on her skull, apologies, it's a bit disgusting, but they found several little cuts that really indicated that she had been eaten. So they would have separated the bones from the flesh, and so yeah, they had to resort to cannibalism. So you can imagine how struggling they were. At that point, that's when there's another English settler that arrived, John Rolfe, and they decided that Jamestown was not necessarily the best place. The Powhatans would have known. I mean, they knew it was a bad place to settle. So the English settler started another little village upriver known as Henrico. Henrico, named after Prince Henry, the Prince of Wales, is James the first son. The one that passed away quite young. So then his little brother Charles, the one that was famously beheaded, ended up taking the throne. And so yeah, the English settled in Henrico. At that point, Pocahontas, she doesn't really want anything to do with the English anymore. She had, well, according to the oral history of the Powhatans, she had a coming of age ceremony. So that's probably when a young girl had her periods. And then they start courting with the local men. That's when she met Cocoon. Cocoon is also featured in the Disney movie. But in the Disney movie, Pocahontas is talking to a tree, and the tree is telling her, "No, Cocoon, he's not fun. He doesn't smile." Actually, Pocahontas and Cocoon seems to have been a great love story. They married, and according to some people from the oral history, they might have had a child. It's not quite sure whether it's a boy or a girl, and again, there's actually no documented evidence that that child ever existed. But it's not because we have no record of it that it didn't happen. The Powhatans wouldn't keep records of all everything like that. And at that point, the English, they're struggling so much that they decided to kidnap Pocahontas. Now, I know it sounds horrible, but the Powhatans, they would have done that as well. Taking some hostages was quite common at the time. The Virginia Company had told them to try to take some hostages, and they knew that Pocahontas was a very important girl because she was the daughter of the chief. We can even imagine that Pocahontas herself, as a child, she might have been trained on what to do if she was kidnapped, because she could have been kidnapped by another tribe anyway. So it's actually quite horrible. They went to grab her, potentially not far after she's given birth to that child that we don't know if they really exist. And again, according to local to native oral history, at that point, Cocoon tried to save her, so he ran towards the fort, and he might have been shot by the English. Again, there's no evidence of that, but that's probably not the type of thing they would record anyway. And then Pocahontas is taken on a ship. According to the English, she was well treated. She was locked on a ship for many months, but she was taught a bit more English. They tried to convert her to Catholicism, to Christianity, and they did. That's partially true. Actually, she resisted for a year. She did not want to convert. And eventually they decided to marry her, so she married John Rolfe. I think he's nearly 40 years old. Pocahontas at that point, she's probably 16 now. She's a bit older now. And so they married. They had a child, Thomas, and eventually they decided to go towards England, to go to visit London, and she was renamed Rebecca, because she was christened, and she had to take an English name. She actually had a few names. Her real name was not Pocahontas. Pocahontas was the name of her mother. Pocahontas actually means little playful one. So that's quite a cool name. But her name was Amanut Mataoka. And but she was known as Pocahontas, even locally. And so at that point, she came with her husband, John Rolfe. John Rolfe is the one that's known for introducing tobacco to Virginia. Well, the native had some form of tobacco for rituals, but he really planted a lot of tobacco in Virginia. And so they came to London. Now, at that point, what you have to imagine is that she's actually a walking advertisement for the Virginia Company. She's there being paraded in London to show everyone that they can go and start a new life in the new world, and they can marry the locals, and everything is fine. And so that's the situation she's in when she comes to England, and that's what is featured in Pocahontas 2, the second Disney movie. Now, that's if you listen to the English. If you listen to the Powhatan oral history, some people claim. Again, there's no evidence of any of it, but some people claim that when she was kidnapped and locked on a boat, she might have been raped by some of the English settlers, maybe even quite a few, and she got pregnant. And of course, that would have been a big issue, because then they would have had to tell her family what they've done to her. So they had to find a solution, and that's when they've decided to marry her. So the child would look like legitimate, and that's actually when she converted to Christianity. She never really saw her family again, but according to not her dad at least, but according to the oral history, when she was on the boat, she had a bit of a breakdown. Well, obviously after being kidnapped and violated. And they allowed her sister to come and visit, so she would have told her sister at the time. And then when they wanted to marry her, did she love John? Maybe. There could have been a bit of a Stockholm syndrome, when you fall in love with with whoever kidnaps you. Or maybe it was just better than the situation she was in. Or maybe did she understand that would bring peace? Because what happened is John actually went to ask the Powhatan permission, and her dad said yes for her to marry John Rolfe. So did she think it was her duty as the daughter of the chief to marry the enemy for peace? Probably. It's hard to know. We don't know. We have no way of knowing what she thought of anything really. But that's when she's taken to London with her husband, and we have a beautiful mural here that represent some of the different events of her life. So, excuse my finger, but this is the alleged clubbing where she saved John Smith. This is later on. So when she came to London, she was invited everywhere. They were printing little portraits of her on tea towel or whatever it might be. Let me show you that's the portrait. That's the only portrait of her we have from her time in England as Rebecca. She spent nearly a year in England. And so at that point, she goes and visits the king. Let me remove the portrait. So in the middle there, it is Pocahontas, aka Rebecca. King James I, Anne of Denmark, the king's wife, and this is John there, John Rolfe. And the gentleman on her left is actually funny. His name is Tokomoko. So when Powhatan agreed for her to marry and go to England, he sent a few men with her to observe, let's say, to bring back some information about England and what it looks like and how many people there are. And there's something that's quite funny in the second Disney, and apparently it is true. So Tokomoko, Chief Powhatan told him he gave him a long stick, a wooden stick and a knife. And he said to him, when you go to England, every time you see a white man, you do a little cut on the long stick, so we can keep a tally of how many white men there are in total. and in the Disney, it's quite funny because it's actually true. Apparently he came to London and he started to keep a tally of the white men, cutting his wooden stick. And obviously very quickly, he has no space on the wooden stick. The stick is completely gone. But apparently that is true. Anyway, so this is the events in London. And this is poor Pocahontas being very poorly here in Gravesend. So what happened is they are in London, they meet a lot of high society and stuff, but Pocahontas, her health was not great. It is to be expected, she's not ready for all those bacteria and viruses in London. So they actually moved to Brentford, on the outskirts of London, where the air is meant to be a bit fresher. And they live together for a little while with their child, Thomas. This is the train station, by the way. So this is one of the bus replacement service I'll be taking in a moment. So they moved to Brentford, and eventually they decided to go back home. So John would go back to his tobacco plantation in Virginia, and she'd hopefully be able to see her family again. And the little Thomas would be able to meet his other side of the family. They boarded a ship. So they've just left London when apparently Pocahontas was very, very unwell. They had to stop here in Gravesend when she left the boat, and they stayed in an inn for a few days, and that's when she died. That's why she was buried here in a pauper's grave. So although John was a man of money, he was already fairly successful with his tobacco, he decided to give her a pauper's grave. Now, was John in love with her? He was a widower, so he had been married before. There's a long letter he had sent to the Reverend to ask why he should to explain why he should marry her, and he talks about how much he loves her, despite her being a savage. Because of course it was a bit conflicting for him. We don't know if that was true. We don't know if it was all a setup from day one because they needed someone to marry her. But from the very cheap burial he gave her, we can kind of guess that maybe it wasn't really the love of his life. And apparently he was investigating people accused him of abusing the locals. And apparently he said, no, I love her. He said, no, I love her. If I just wanted to abuse a local, I would have chosen one that was more pleasing to the eye. So, And by the way, Smith was also investigated at some point by the Virginia Company years earlier because people said he was trying to marry Pocahontas to become the heir of the Powhatan community, to have a lot of land. And Smith had replied something along the lines, no, I may have touched her after a few drinks, but I never tried to marry her because I knew she wasn't the heir. Which is true. Powhatan had many kids in total. But at the time of John Smith anyway, she was a child. She probably had some tattoos. The front of her skull was actually shaved. For the English, that would have been very, very different, at least. Yes, Linda, it's hard to tell whether he was an awful person or, but yes, very probably. And so he gave her a cheap burial here, where we were earlier, and he also dropped little Thomas. So little Thomas was dropped in Plymouth, so he didn't go back to the New World with his dad. In his defense, little Thomas was a bit unwell as well. There were a few people that were from the locals that were with Pocahontas. A few of them were unwell on board of the ship. Some people have claimed, it's probably bonkers, but some people have claimed that Pocahontas was actually poisoned. Maybe they didn't want her to go back to the New World, because then she would have been able to meet her dad, the Chief Powhatan, and she would have been able to tell them what they really did to her, and then that would sour the relationship again with between the natives and the English settlers. Considering there were more people that were sick on the ship, I don't think that's very possible, unless they actually poisoned other people in very small quantities just to make it look believable. But it's a bit far-fetched. She was probably killed by a bacteria she wasn't used to. But yeah, John went back to Virginia to deal with his tobacco. Her dad, Powhatan, died not long after. And when John died, finally, his uncle that had raised him in the UK over here, bearing in mind John was potentially not his dad, that's probably why John left the kid here. He probably knew that Pocahontas had been abused, and he probably knew that little Thomas was not his kid. Some people believe that the kid's dad might have been the governor at the time. He was called Thomas as well, so that might be why they called him Thomas. We don't know. We probably will never know. But it is very possible that John just married her to save the situation, never really loved her, and knew that little Thomas was not actually his son. But eventually, though, after John died, little Thomas inherited all the plantation. He inherited the plantation in Virginia, and he then went back to the New World, which is quite sad because at the time the Powhatan they didn't want anything to do with the English settlers anymore. So little Thomas probably never met his family again, or at least not his grandfather, And Thomas, though, he has a lot of descendants. There are quite a few famous people in America that can claim a straight descent to Princess Pocahontas. You have Thomas Jefferson, you have two First Lady, Nancy Reagan and Edith Bowling Wilson. You have an astronomist as well, Percival something, I think his name was, an actor, Edward Norton. So quite a few people in America can actually claim descendant to little Thomas and Pocahontas. And there might be some more we don't know about if indeed she did have another child with Cocoon, but that again we don't really know, I'm afraid. So yeah, if you've seen the the Disney movie, really the story is very different, and we don't know if we really don't know anything about Pocahontas and her personality. If you listen to the English, she was very much into English culture. She converted to Christianity because she loved Jesus. Some people that had seen her at a ball in London claimed that she loved England more than her own people. We don't know any of that. She probably felt a sense of duty, and she probably accepted to marry John. That was like at least 20 years her senior, just to save the relationship between the Powhatan and the settlers, and it worked. It did work. That stopped the Anglo-Powhatan wars for a while. Then they started again later on. But really, if she accepted to come to England and marry John to save her own people, then she was really successful. She appeased the relationships between the two the two communities for a few years. So yeah, the truth is Pocahontas, she doesn't have a voice. We don't know how she felt. She might have been very much in love with John. We just don't know that. Anyway, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Let me show you my face again. And let me know in the chat if you have any questions about anything before we go. I'm getting closer to the train station because if I see the bus, I'll jump on the bus. Thank you very much for coming today. If you I'm live. If you have any questions, let me know in the chat. If not, I'll see you next week. Next weekend, we're going on the Strand. I don't know if that's my bus. Probably not. Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks, everyone, for coming today. If any of you were completely new to me, if you've made it that far into the video, I hope you might consider subscribing. Thanks, MP. Thanks, everyone. And if any of you drop me a little tip on PayPal or buy me a coffee, this bus is going to the Amazon, wherever that is. If we're going to Brazil, I'm going. I don't know where Amazon is. There might be a village called Amazon. I don't know. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Sarah, and thanks the other Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for coming today. Oh, thank you, Mark. That's very, very much appreciated. Cool. I'll go and check if this is my bus. I don't think so, but I'll go and check. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully, I'll see some of you next Sunday on the Strand. It's one of those Monopoly tours. And keep YouTubing, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.